My take on Kay Patrick's Mrs. S. I feel like you will have heard it all before because everyone's just completely obsessed after they read Mrs. S. And it was...
Don't turn it down before you say it.
You should have been in the room when we met, when the granted judges met after we had read your manuscript. It was just like... the thirst was real. So, Kay Patrick is a writer based in Scotland. Their poetry has appeared in the Paris Review, Poetry Review, Granta and Five Dials, and was shortlisted for the White Review Poets Prize in 2021, the same year that Kay was also shortlisted for the White Review Short Story Prize. In 2023, they were shortlisted for the BBC National Short Story Award. Their debut novel, Mrs. S., published by Fourth Estate, UK and Europa, US, was selected as an Observer Best Debut of the Year, well chosen, and Kay was named a Granta Best of Young British Novelist for 2023. Their debut poetry collection, Three Births, was published by Granta Poetry this March. And here's my reader's impression. In a contemplative essay on poetic craft, Mary Riffler asks, have you never put language in an extenuating circumstance with dangerous limits until an acute physical sensation results? It's extremely rare and startling for a novel to unfold so perilously that each chapter strikes the reader as being the final chapter, even though you can clearly see the unread pages remain. Both times I started reading Kay Patrick's novel, Mrs. S, in the morning, and you know something's happening in the text when the breaks in your attention aren't directed towards notifications from the outside world, but pauses in immediacy, pacing breaks that your heart needs in order to hold out as long as the pages do. You read, you pace, and when you find yourself switching on lights, it's clear that the book has absorbed most of a day, or vice versa. This story of sensory entanglement is alive. I was like, oh. This story of sensory entanglement is alive to the alarm and exhilaration of being fully conscious. It operates on a level of sensitivity that's usually incompatible with the stability of the novel form. The novelists who make this work tend to be from other centuries. The form the novel has mostly maintained between those days and these ones seem to require a choice. Draw a steady arc or an ardent one. Kay Patrick's Mrs. S does both with the ineluctable freshness of Elle Woods tackling a Harvard law degree. What, like it's hard? Mrs. S collapsed me onto my metaphysical fainting couch with its fast flickering combinations of jaggedness and delicacy, soap-smooth shards of insolence and incendiary tenderness. The prose holds an electrical charge that could be site-specific. The characters do move in and around a zone ruled by Eros, after all. Then again, maybe the unruly hum of this text is carried across from Kay Patrick's poetry. Probably both are true. Or neither. I'm more than half convinced that this writer is at work on some sort of alchemical formula that enables a novel to become a racing partner for the mind. I give you Kay Patrick.
Oh yeah, that could be good actually. Oh no, I'm going to break it, yeah. That's good? Sweet. No? Yeah. That seems precarious.
If it's okay for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it look dangerous? Oh wow, this is such a big build-up now. Okay. Yeah, can everyone hear? Great. So for everyone that hasn't read the book, which I assume is most people, it's about an affair between the headmaster's wife and someone who's working at a boarding school. So the scene that I'll read from is sort of the first intimate moment they share, even though it's kind of essentially still sexless. I suppose it's not. Yeah, so I'll read. They go swimming, which is, gay, etc. It's wild swimming, so it's even gayer. We slow down at an enormous bridge. A long line of motorbikes is waiting to pull in. Ah, Devil's Bridge, have you seen? No. How have you missed it? How have you missed so much? She indicates, following the motorbikes. There is no room for another car, so she leaves the hazards on, blocking somebody else in. Quick, hurry before we get in trouble. In the middle of the bridge, the river wide and slow beneath, she shows me 2 round imprints sunk into the wall. The devil's hands? The devil's hands. So tiny. Not if you have hooves. She presses her knuckles into the dense, stone-worn smooth. Is it lucky? Probably not. Probably the opposite. I see now she is wearing men's swimming shorts, a faded pink, also guaranteed to be partly his, like the car, like the trip. What's wrong? Nothing. Always nothing with you. Her tone is unexpected, a closeness we have not yet shared. She senses it too, shifting subject, putting her hands against the sky. Such a glorious day. A van sells bright white ice creams. Bikers in their heavy leathers lean against the bridge, licking their wrists, catching the melt. Cones are tossed half-eaten to the rubbish, wasps purling in and out of the bin's mouth. Would you like one? Not yet, maybe later. I looked too long at a group of young men, only in leather waistcoats or shirtless entirely, trouser buttons biting just below their belly buttons. Want a picture? Come on then, take a picture, pussy, one of the men calls to me. She is already by the car, lifting her head to see, unable to hear. Squinting through the glare, she waves me over. I look back at the man who has already forgotten me, now pushing a friend with a similarly beautiful chest. His arms around his middle, then his ribs, soft punches thrown into each shoulder. I feel the itch of skin beneath my binder, inevitable. I notice things I want to steal. I go back to her. How would he be, sitting in his passenger seat, watching her hand on a gear stick, watching her hands against the sky, watching her hands made into hooves? He would have a beautiful chest. He would be less astonished. Everything okay? Always. I change tune for her. She raises that eyebrow. Well then, let's get going. I hope there aren't crowds like this everywhere. Don't you worry. This is a secret spot, top secret. She taps the page open across my lap, finger just wide of her biro star. Well then, I say, parroting a catchphrase I won't tell. Oh, I see. It's like that. Familiarity again, this time easier. Sheep, fields, sheep, slow pace of stone walls. Today the blue has heft, has building heat. I didn't know you could have weather like this here, I didn't know. With one hand on the wheel, she takes a pair of sunglasses from the door. Yes, of course, honestly, what do you think of us? Us. She never mentions a different home to this one. Wildflowers begin as we climb higher. The car struggles on the hill bends, up, up, up. Tall weeds, but maybe not weeds, with starred white flowers. I am not concentrating on the map. Here! Ah, okay. She reverses down a narrow lane. A sign for the campground appears. She pulls into a passing place. I'm sure this counts as parking. From the boot, she hands me a bag, lunch. She puts on a green backpack, worn, straps frayed. Without worry, she jumps up onto the low wall, spinning over her legs, landing safely on the other side. I follow, slower, more careful with my skin, not wanting a scrape or nick. Each movement she makes is positive, whole. This is a body at peace. She thinks of nobody else. Are we trespassing? Only sort of. To our right, a few tents have been set up. In the distance is a line of caravans and an office. I see the tall knotweeds with white flowers up close. Don't touch those, hogweed, it will burn. I worry now, walking even slower, the space between us lengthening. We drop along a bank, following another wall, moving through a spot where the stones have been displaced. Downhill, she marches towards a thin wood. Her calves are arrows through the grass. Sorry, it's always very breathless reading this. Woo, haven't read this long before. Bear with me. In the broken shade, she puts things in her mouth and calls out their names. Lovage, watermint. More, there's more, but she's too far ahead for me to hear. I round a corner and find her bent over a patch of pink faces, petals uptight. She frowns. This, I can't remember what it's called. Like the roses, the information is recently learned. There have been other books, other garish covers. This is one way of belonging. I understand. She struggles, combing through the images she's stored, books stacked somewhere in that grand house. No, I can't remember. How disappointing. A plane rips overhead. Seconds later, an apocalyptic boom sounds off the rocks. We are in the middle of a valley, as if a glacier has only just finished moving through. She places her hands over her ears. There's another one. Sure enough, another dot appears, expanding. Not a plane, but a jet, something harder, faster. The military prefer these secret corners of the English countryside. The sound is dragged behind. I don't bring my hands to my ears. She watches me. How can you stand it? I don't know. I don't mind. We come out of the trees and stagger further down. The slope is steeper now. A sound of water increases. She crouches, picks a clover, and bites behind its head. She doesn't offer or ask me to do the same. Instead, the flavour is announced sweet, something like honey, wonderful, she confirms. Her personalities catch like loose thread on a branch. The old-fashioned headmaster's wife and this person, setting her teeth to a stem's nape, stood tall in her pink shorts. Almost there. Scree is loose under my feet. Water appears, a clear river. Heather makes soft mounds. She whips through the bracken, points to a distant fell and suggests climbing it. Not today, but one day, I am hopeful. We drop down onto a track. There is nothing but the rhythm of our shoes on the dusty surface, birdsong, breath, focused in the heat. I want to ask her how they found this place, but the quiet is too lovely. Familiarity, a new familiarity, this time bodily. Little clutches of fabric, the swipe of our thighs. This is it. At first I can't see anything, only slabs of grey stone. She moves towards a copse of only 5 or 6 trees, slender silver bark, green leaves. I watch her first, standing at an edge, peering down, pleased. It needed to be as good as she remembered. Without waiting for me, she removes her white shirt, each button a piece of my own spine undone. Her swimming costume is an athlete's, black, streamlined. I am surprised by her strength. She adjusts the fit, a finger slid underneath the short straps, then the place where the suit meets her hips. She catches me watching her. I blush. She calls to me. My anxiety has its own heartbeat. Desperate for the cool across my sticky face, I wear a sleeveless t-shirt, the binder hidden underneath. Underpants too, the t-shirt's hem past my hips, stopping mid-thigh. You'll go in wearing that? Yeah, no costume, didn't bring one with me. Never thought it would be warm enough to swim. Well, little did you know. She accepts my lie. My costume balled up in my underwear drawer. I no longer know how to wear it. I reach her at the edge. She has waited for my reaction. Below is a large waterfall, a pool eroded beneath it, bigger than I imagined, enough to spend time swimming to either side. Jeweled surface, a fish, brown trout, she explains, is visible deep on the stony bed. It's beautiful. It is. She clambers down and dives, muscle, water. Her back is a swimmer's back, all arch and grace. For a moment, I can't move. She doesn't hurry me, treads water, calm. I grip the edge of my toes, promise myself I'll jump at the count of 5, but only manage on 10, hopping forward. I can't make the same shape as her. Rush of rock at my back, relief of vanishing beneath the bright surface, t-shirt ballooning around me. I open my mouth to drink, to taste the cold, reappear to her face a few feet from mine. She smiles. Oh, there you are. We haul up to the waterfall, a large flat rock partially submerged, able to be clambered onto. Matching flex of our forearms, she admires my brawn. I pretend not to hear. We sit side by side underneath. She draws up her legs, the crease at her knee. Here she does not know, does not mind what she gives away. Water hammering our heads, necks. Without warning, she slips back in, completes a few lengths at speed, front crawl. I float. If I could choose a different chest, I would choose this water. If I could choose a different body, I would choose this water. I say the last line aloud, river slipping on my tongue. What? She swims towards me, slowly. Breaststroke now. What did you say? Nothing. But of course, nothing. She rolls her eyes. I roll mine back.
You know it's good when the author gets breathless reading it. I had to fan myself a little bit. So I guess I'll open with a question about being a triple threat in terms of novelist, short story writer, poetry. Can you compare and contrast what it's like moving between those spaces? Also, I don't want to reveal my question, so I'm here. So you can have an answer ready.
Well, sorry. What it's like moving between those forms.
And also, I think it's complicated by the revelation on the panel that you actually conceive of things in images.
This is going to haunt me now. I'm going to regret saying that forever. I can already feel this.
Okay, I won't bring it up ever again.
I feel very lucky to work between those forms. I think I'm quite hyper productive, I guess. And so I drive my agent quite mad because I'm always sending her like half a shit novel or like a fragment of this or a fragment of that or like some half-baked idea that I just WhatsApp her, and she's like, please go to sleep. Please leave me alone. And I've been like that since I was a kid. I'm quite like scatter-brained. So I need lots of things to be working on at once, so it helps to have 3 forms to pick from, because it means that I can have a bunch of projects that are happening at once and let them all inform each other.
It sounds like not all of them take, or once you've sent it to your agent, then it's kind of the official like statement of intent.
We actually have a rule now where I'm not allowed to send her anything. I just have to tell her the idea, and she just does like Caesar's thumb on it. But I'm also learning to kind of slow down. I think like I'm quite an enthusiastic person, and I need to do a bit more of the thinking. Also quite impatient, so it's like a horrible combination if you're both those things and a writer, I think, sometimes.
Or it means that, so when you hit a wall with something in the novel, the short story, then you just like divert to another path, like in another form.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with poetry, because I was writing quite a lot of the poetry collection alongside Mrs. S, and it was helpful. In fact, a lot of the lines I swapped, so some lines ended up in the poetry that then were in Mrs. S and vice versa. So it's a good... Grateful to have it as like a breakout form, I suppose. So if I get stuck with a novel, I have somewhere else to go that I can think differently. But then, you know, like I said, they keep informing each other, which is really helpful.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask how you describe your how do you describe your writing to people?
It's fine.
Yeah. So they're like, you write. What kind of fiction do you write?
I often say it's quite annoying. My writing, especially Mrs. S, it's quite polarizing. As you heard me read it, it's always an interesting experience to read it because there's a lot of punctuation, a lot of full stops, but there's hardly any commas. So it's a lot of short sentences that kind of are constantly colliding. And so as a reading experience, it didn't occur to me while I was writing it that I was doing anything weird. It was just like, because with this book, there's a lot of sex in it. Spoiler alert, I guess. And to get that, when I knew what I wanted, it was during lockdown, and I knew that I wanted to. I think for me the stakes have to be quite low to enter into a project. So I had the single idea, which was just that I would write a horny lesbian novel, be straightforward, keep it horny, keep it lesbian, it'd be fine. I didn't need to make it any more complicated than that.
That was the formula?
That was the formula. Of course, like when I started writing, I was like, oh, desire is really hard. Also shame, like I love writing, I realised so much of the book is about shame. But I started with the sex scenes, because I realised that if I didn't have good sex writing, then I didn't really have a novel.
So it's sex scenes connected by bridges, so everything else is like a bridge?
Yeah, and what was more interesting is that in order to get the sex scenes to work, the style for the novel emerged in that practice. So I wrote most of the sex scenes first, made sure they weren't shit, and then that tone, that style, that pace, I guess like rhythm and way of, I guess like how the gaze functions too. Gaze, G-A-Z-E, not gaze plural. Although both, you know, fine. Get the gaze working. That then informed the tone for the rest of the text, which was kind of an interesting experiment, because even when I'm reading a scene like that, it's very similar to how the sex scenes are paced and balanced as well, which is why the book is exhausting and kind of annoying, because it's like bam, 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 like constantly.
How did you evaluate that the sex scenes worked? Were you like texting people like segments of?
Imagine. Give
like,
myself
hey,
a real reputation. Get on the apps, yeah.
I mean, was there a focus group, or is this all entirely your own evaluation and sense of what is working and what isn't?
It was my own evaluation. I didn't subject anyone to being the judge of that. I think like you do develop an instinct for your own work that you can trust. I feel like I've lost that a bit at the minute and I want it back. But back then, because I never imagined an audience, I never imagined a reader, it was just lockdown and I'd gone insane. So I let myself be the judge. I did a lot of reading aloud, and in order to get the sex scenes working, I spend a lot of time with other material, so I never write in isolation. And I spent a lot of time copying out passages from really great sex writing from other authors. And not all of it was sex writing. I mean, I copied out a lot of Giovanni's Room, I copied out a lot of Marjorie Kemp, I copied out a lot of Lucy by Jamaica Kincaid, like a lot of these, and the style of those things are very bodily. It's like writing through the body. It's very immediate. They're very physical texts.
The Marjorie Kemp connection is unexpected for me, but now that you say it, it makes sense. I'm like,
But the Bob Glock's book. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I wasn't in the medieval
Yeah.
manuscript. No. I don't really do it like that. But he rewrites like Marjorie Kemp is.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
but because I think the thing about her that sticks out to me in my mind is the way that she was so inventive about all the reasons why she wouldn't sleep with her husband, right? Like, so it's kind of like an anti-erotica in some ways, but the rewrite, yeah, that makes sense.
It's like a 14th century autobiographical work, I suppose you'd call it.
Yeah.
And she's not having sex with her husband, but she does believe she's having sex with Jesus.
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's a super horny text from the 14th century. A lot of really good sex writing. And this wonderful American author called Robert Glock he kind of he rewrote that story, so kind of did a translation of it alongside a contemporary story of his own love affair with this character called Elle. And it's some of the best sex writing that I think exists that you can come by. There's a lot of, I think, like interiority. I think that Garth Greenwell does really well as well, that interiority, exteriority that happens in moments of desire or, with desiring bodies. So you're moving in and out of focus all the time.
This kind of links to a question, but it sounds like it was intuitive, because I think that one of the things that made Mrs. S such an intense experience was the way that there was no division between the things that the protagonist says aloud and the things that the protagonist is thinking, and there's almost like a fear or an apprehension that something that shouldn't be said will be said aloud, and that I as the reader will miss that moment of revelation or something like that. So I think that there was just so much. It was like 7 times 7 veils, basically, and you can see shapes moving behind them, and then sometimes emerging. Was that part of your, I guess, mission statement for the novel, like to have this almost overwhelming interiority?
Yeah, it's really hard when you've done events to separate out what you were thinking about the novel and what has now been said to you about the novel. So
right.
I don't know what to take credit for here, to be honest. I think because the book's voice, the tone, emerged through sex writing, it must have been part of the mission statement to have that. Yes, because practically, when I found myself not writing the sex scenes and going into writing the opening chapter, I tried doing, speech marks, line breaks, commas, and just found that the text became too slow. Like it was dragging in a way that then slowed down how I wanted it to be, and I felt that happening, and I switched gears. So then I actively changed the sentences to be very short and sharp, and I just put the dialogue in the paragraphs and decided it didn't really matter if people knew if it was a line of thought or a line of speech. And it made the book had to have like a certain speed and a certain exhaustive quality, I think, and this minutiae of looking. And if you get really into looking, and we were talking about this on the panel a bit, but this second by second, the book became second by second, minute by minute. So the scenes that I'm writing, it's 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, or half an hour, but it's sometimes a passage or a chapter, or so it's like these tiny incremental details, which to me, I think with sex writing and why it appeals to me so much is you can do something very strange with time and language in sex writing, where it's this very, in the act of it, in the reality of it, it's the speeds of it are quite complicated, but in the text I had this chance to slow it right down and bring it through an interiority, which seemed like quite a fun thing to do. Interesting thing.
Was it fun?
It was fun. Yeah, this whole book was like a giant pleasure project. Like, I always say that like it's born out of fantasy as well. I was just in lockdown thinking about what I'd want to read, and in some ways it's like lesbian pulp fiction too. It's like it has inheritance from that too, that like place of pleasure. But yeah, it was a total pleasure writing this. Absolutely.
The other thing that I was wondering was kind of how to put this. Did you feel sort of like because of the intimacy aspect, and because it seems that these are primarily linked to sex scenes, right? So you have this. did you have a sense of communicating something that, almost like an espionage, like acts of espionage, communicating something that the characters only intended for each other and you're smuggling the messages out to us? Or was it more like a UN vibe translator where you're like, okay, this is what's going on between them and they're fine with you knowing it? Like, was there anything clandestine about your communication of what was happening? And was that, if so, was that part of the pleasure of it?
What do you think?
No.
I mean, I'm interested in like the experience as a reader, because I suppose we're talking about voyeurism. And
Not necessarily voyeurism. I felt like there are instances when the narrator describes like everybody around Mrs. S wanting to be the only one that Mrs. S is looking at, right? Like, and I felt as if that experience of being the only one that Mrs. S is looking at was being offered up to us via the narrator or this narrative persona. So it was a kind of, it was more of a gifting of something that could otherwise, like a move that can only be made in fiction, like actually, and that it was done so effortlessly and elegantly and all of that, you know, that was just swooning over that. But I wondered about how, as a writer, one could position myself. Like I can see the move being made, right? Like, but I couldn't understand how I would put my mind into the story to make that move, like to make it happen. Like I can experience the effect, but I can't produce it.
I mean, probably to the first half of the question, I think both is happening in the text. Like, there's the UN translator, is that what you said? UN
vibe translator.
UN vibe translator, I think. I think that active translation is happening in an attempt for me to translate the body, right? So I think like an attempt to translate the physical, and that's through what it's like to be in my own body. And I think if you identify as something that's queer or trans or non-binary, then you have a constant translation of your own body happening constantly. That minutiae of looking, you're applying to yourself and your surroundings and how your body is then placed in those surroundings. So there's like I guess like, you know, we were talking on the panel as well about writing from experience. And I wanted to see what text could do with that experience. Like I wanted to see, I often say how text could hold on to and release the queer body, like what the limits of the line would be in doing that. So in some ways it was a little bit of a thought experiment. And then the second half of the question, that I think when it comes to desire, I can't remember if it's Lauren Bollant or Anne Carson, I think maybe they both sort of said that desire is happening to you from the outside, but you experience it as if it's being produced from within, right? So I wanted to include that antagonism in the text too, and I think that kind of produces a sense of espionage on a line level, or even on like a chapter level, I guess, like that tension between those two, the confusion of those two things, you know, that it's where desire is being produced from, I guess. That makes sense.
And did you have like a timeline? Like it's not quite a plot question, but this is why I thought it was plotty, because everything was so, like the flame burned so brightly that you just kept watching for when will the end of this be? When will the end of this be? And it kind of seemed like
I get in trouble for that.
But also I think that there was a time travel trick that you did. Well, trick makes it sound like it was facile, which it wasn't at all. When there's a gift that is that's exchanged, and that gift, which is a pebble, actually takes the couple right back to like the beginning, even before either of them really knew that it was the beginning of the infatuation. And that, I think that was one of the only moments when I got a sense of structure, like, oh, has there been a beginning and an end established? Because if it's possible to travel back to the beginning, then is the end already set in stone? Like that was my, or were you more just kind of
your version makes me sound smart, so I'll take it. Yeah.
Or were you linking sex scenes until you were just kind of like, okay, I think they're tired of banging each other now, and
like how did the actual the infrastructure of the novel? Yeah, they're tired of banging each other now. I get criticised for that. Then they don't bang soon enough. Is like the big feedback on the
No,
on the
you've
plot.
always got to delay. You've always got
Yeah,
to delay.
yeah. I figured that's what I thought when I was writing it. But the structure. This novel is kind of was a wild experience because I do feel like there's a sense. It's like funny to mention time travel. I didn't write it in order at all. I think when I left the sex scenes behind and started beginning the book, the opening chapter was the last thing that I wrote in the end. That was the last edit that we had before it went to print, which is strange. And I think there was a certain point in the process where it sort of felt like you could take all the chapters out of order and put them in any other order, and the book would still be able to function.
Yeah, actually.
Which is an insane way of writing because you're essentially just like moving like chess pieces around all the time. And I'm trying not to do that at the moment, actually, and it's going very badly. So it's possible that I am just an agent of chaos, and I need to stick with that. Whereas now I'm trying to be more orderly and have like a post-it note. I mean, I tried to do the post-it note thing, but they all fell off the fucking wall, and I was like on the floor being like, oh, now it's more interesting, you know. And I was like, it's hard to be my editor, I guess. And I think like at a certain point in a text, I love collaboration. Like I'm someone that needs input, so I like to be edited. I'm not sure that I'm very good at editing myself, but I love it when someone else gets involved and just starts like deleting stuff. Like I get I was about to say turns me on, but I think we've had enough of that chat so far. I love that part of it. I love to like have somebody else's hands on the text is like my favourite part. Someone asked a question about community before, and it made me think about collaboration, and how the way that you collaborate with an editor is like you have to end up forming this community around the book that is part like operative and part like practical, but also kind of collaborative. Like you end up being in a practice with your editor, which is quite a mad dynamic because there's like strange power in it, and like it's an odd exchange. But Kish, my wonderful editor, brought the structure to the novel in a certain way where she was able to say, this is what we're missing, and then I could do my job, which was like fill in the gaps in a way that wasn't chronological, and she could just feed them back into where they needed to be in the text. So.
And were there any edits that you resisted and like just felt like, no, I think that this needs to be in place?
No, she was, I guess like, I was nervous about publishing a book like this because you're not sure, like at a point in my career where it was my first novel, I remain actually not particularly confident. So it's learning getting the chance to work with someone who didn't require me to make compromises I didn't know I was making. Like I have no regrets about this book. Everything that's in it that I needed to be in it is in it. And Kish did this amazing thing where I think there's a big risk with writing queer text, especially trans text, where you're asked to explain yourself, or you're asked to kind of be understood in the text in a way that affects the text directly. So it can be a very clumsy editor would ask me to explain something like a binder, so that you imagine this reader that's approaching the text that can't like think for themselves almost, who can't go off and find that information. That you have to be, the pressure as a trans person is to deliver that information to make sure that it's immediately understood, you know. And I think had I had pressure on me to do that in this text, it wouldn't have worked.
No,
you know?
it wouldn't. And also there's already so much decoding going on throughout, but then to add that extra layer that's also kind of a yucky layer. Yeah. I'm glad that you had that editorial influence.
Yeah.
Do we
I didn't know if we were in trouble. Oh yeah.
We almost. I had more questions. Okay, can I ask you before we open up to the audience? Oh no, which question do I choose? Okay, I think the one that I'm most curious about. I'll just ask you the PDF question later because I want to know that one. But the one that I'm most curious about is, do you have thoughts on the contract between reader and writer? Like, do you think that there's something that the books that you love offer you or that you receive from them, and is there something that you are trying to offer to a reader through your writing?
Yes, I hope so. It's funny, I didn't, like I said, because I wrote this, I mean, a novel, no matter what it's about, is produced by the conditions under which you write. So this to me feels like a lockdown text where it was like there was no one else involved. It was like just me, and there was definitely no reader. That a reader was a fantasy. Like that's another part of the fantasy. Like having an audience for the book was like a fantasy. It wasn't a reality. And since having readers, it's been the most surreal experience of my life. Like I find it like, I know some people find it stressful. I love it. I'm like, talk to me about it. Like, because you learn, there's only so much I know about my own writing, and you learn the rest of it through how it's being read. And you learn kind of intuitively what to take on and what to leave behind. But I think I take everything on. And it's fun because then the text is never the same again. Like, it changes every time it's read, and that's wild to me. And as a person who likes, it sounds like the opposite, I'm a chaotic writer, but I'm quite controlled in other places in my life, and with something like this, you just have to relinquish it. It's just this thing that doesn't belong to you anymore. And I find that, again, this kind of infinite collaboration, I guess, where it goes to a reader and the book doesn't belong to me at that point, so they can say whatever they want to me, you know.
Thank you for your generosity. I mean it. Any questions from the audience?
On the panel, you actually said that you would want to be in charge of the first and the last line of a novel. And you only just now said that the first chapter actually came last, which intrigued me. Would you give us a first and the last line, just say whether you're still happy with the first and the last line?
In real time? Oh my God, let's do this.
Okay.
Oh, the first line's boring, though, because my sentences are so short. I feel like I should read... I think like for this, the first line is, she argues with the gardener. Thank you. But the last line of the opening chapter is, dare her to wave, to give that hand to me, which I suppose I would consider more the opening line of the book. Oh God, what's the last line? I can't believe I made myself the boss of this, and now I'm having to answer to it. Oh no, it's okay, it's okay. Do you know it? Oh my God.
No, I think I might.
I think you were about to say it, I think.
I will. No, I will, or is it I will not? I'm trying to remember whether it was a negative or positive.
Oh, I will leave, and she does not know it yet.
Okay, that was nothing near.
It was getting close. She said, oh. No, I'm happy with that. I'm happy with the... I mean, she argues with the gardener is also fine. I guess that's like intriguing in a certain way. But the first paragraph I'm happiest with. That last line is not bad, so... I will not fire myself. I shall retain my position as boss of first and last lines.
Hi again. Thank you so much. And I wanted to ask, breathing. You talked about relinquishing control after the book is done, and then during the panel, you also mentioned the private versus public parts. With a writing that touches upon really intimate topics, whether it's sex, which is not always used as an intimate way in a lot of writing, but in this case I feel like it is, or queerness, transness, and how much of vulnerability exists in the writing process, and then in the relinquishing control over the finished object. How much is too much, and how do you gauge where to put the line?
God, I think I'm still... We were talking a bit about this before, like about kind of like how to remain boundaried in your work. It's hard. I feel like I think that before, with the private and the public, when I understood that's what was happening to the book, and it becomes less and less private in kind of stages, which helps, you know. So first it goes to an agent, then it goes to the editor, and then everyone else at the off, and suddenly you're talking to people about it in a way that the text is alive beyond the way that it lived for you. And I think that helped. When it became clear that I wouldn't have a choice and I kind of have to talk about it in public, believe it or not, there was a time a year ago where I would have not slept for like 2 weeks knowing that I'd have to speak publicly about the book. It doesn't come naturally to me at all. It makes me very anxious. But then when I realized that you're in an exchange and you don't have to be an authority over your own book, I think that was quite an amazing aspect of the public, you know, where it's like, when I say the book doesn't belong to me, I think that became kind of a mantra where I was like, I don't have to be in charge of how this text is used, and I have to be vulnerable to how it is being used actively, ongoingly in front of me, I guess. It became much easier to talk about it when I realized I didn't have to be the one that knew the most about it, you know?
other questions? Oh, there's one more. Okay.
I have one question, because you write a book about a topic that I think becomes more and more political. To what extent are you happy in the role of a spokesperson? And to what extent would you rather be a poet?
Oh God, I'd rather be a poet all the time. Listen, that's probably the more complicated part of the question that you asked, which is that if you're writing into a community, I don't know if any of you know the writer Gary Indiana, who died recently, a wonderful writer, and there's that famous, well, now becoming famous because I think Janique or someone brought it out, an email that he sent. He was like, I'm happy with the piece, but please drop the LGBTQ aspect of it. Like, he just wrote this really blunt email saying, please don't make it gay, basically. And there is a part of me that understands that impulse. To have the text read outside of, it's hard if you write a book like this. People feel like it belongs in a certain part of the bookshop and it's not to be read widely, and that's hard as an author. It sometimes narrows the questions. It can narrow the sense of the book in the world, but then also you can just forget about all that and it doesn't really matter. And my favourite part of the book is talking to other queer people about how it was important for them. So in that case, I don't want to be a responsibility because I only have one experience of being queer in the world. I don't have, there's no singular experience of that. Of course, it has to be treated like, the problem is when it gets treated like there should be an authority, which is why that's why I use that word. And it's the last thing that I want to be. But I'm also proud, I'm like, yeah, it's amazing to have those conversations with people who have connected with the book in the way that it was written. As much as I love multiple readings, that's also a really special part of it. But responsible, I think like two sides to it. I feel I want to be responsible because I care about that politically, and I want there to be more and more text like this. Obviously, there's plenty of things in the UK anyway that I would love to change, and I am a politically active person. But yeah, sometimes it can be in a complicated relationship with the text that you produce because you want different. I don't know. It's hard. It's a really hard thing to answer in a clean way. Basically, I think my mind is always slightly back and forth about it because I am all those things at once, I guess. But I don't want there to be. No one should be an authority on anything like that because then it limits the amount of voices that get to tell their side of that experience as well, I guess, is my final closing answer to a very messy answer otherwise.
So that's the end of the session. Thank you, everybody. Oh wait, was there? Sorry, stop. There's one more question.
One more question.
Sorry, it might be a messy and unformulated question.
That's me. Go for it.
Okay. I really liked what you said about the pressure to feel you have to answer to yourselves in your work, and then realizing maybe you don't have to, and trying to get away from that. And specifically what you said about poetry as a mode that somehow kind of frees you from that a little bit, or offers a bit more protection. And if I understood correctly, I was also intrigued by what you said about how some lines from the novel ended up kind of moving over to your poems. So I'd really love to hear a little bit more about poetry and how you find that as a mode to work in.
I love poetry so much, but poets get a hard time, man. It's tough being a poet. No, I love poetry. I think of all the things I love to read poetry the most. I think that's where I learn most about the line, and where, like, I've had this line going through my head at the Apollinaire line, one of the translations of Zone, where it just ends on, because we were talking about last lines, my favourite last line in a poem is just goodbye, goodbye, sun cut-throated. I mean, there's like 9 translations of that line, but that's my favourite one, which is irrelevant to your question, but I just thought I'd say it out loud anyway. Poetry as a form, I think, is my biggest teacher, which is the most pretentious shit you could say. Already said it, so it's out there now. It's live streamed, so I do think I learn the most from poetry, though, which is why I said in the taxi that I don't care about plot as some kind of a weird protest. And I think that probably more than I realise, I'm working towards that form, or trying to figure out how that form can balance itself, or not balance itself, how it can disrupt the novel. God, now I've said the word disrupt. How it can... the novel is such a complicated thing in that it already exists as itself over and over and over again, and I feel like the poem doesn't. The poem has this, it's like the most shape-shifting form, right? Like, that's how it feels to me. And with the novel, sometimes it feels like you're kind of buried into a bit of a legacy, and it's hard to, you can too easily find the edge in a novel, and in a poem you can't. And I think I'm always trying to figure out how to lose the edge in a novel, I guess.
Any more questions? Where is this? Okay, this is the end. Thank you, everyone.